It's May 11th, 2024, and I'm with World War II veteran John Jekovich, and we're going over his book, Their Mother's Son, and we're on chapter 14, page 396, Catacombs Au Revoir. And your serial number, sir?
4495.
Yeah, here we go. We're picking up page 396. All in all, there must have been a dozen separate rooms, and pretty much the same. Renee seemed familiar with all of them, as she looked at each of them with certain discernment and repugnance. Finally, after an hour of roaming in the passageway, we surfaced and felt like a good breath of fresh air as we sat on one of the benches provided. I looked at Renee inquiringly. She explained that we had just left the old limestone quarries used before the war as a cemetery by the city of Paris and taken over by the French resistance during the war. Were you aware that Renee was in the French resistance?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And was that Renee's final dismissal? Was that Renee? Did she make it clear to you that she was in the resistance?
Say again?
Did Renee make it clear to you that she was in the resistance, the French resistance? Did Renee let you know that she was in the French resistance?
Well, it was obvious. It was obvious.
What did the French resistance do, John?
Fight against the Germans.
Was Renee being in the French resistance the reason for her death?
Well, the Mother Superior figured she went on the wrong path. So this was we have to climatize you. We're going to send you to Vietnam as a missionary. And she never got out of there.
The rooms she had shown me were the headquarters for the French underground. I said that I understood that part, but what was not too clear to me was her involvement in the entire event. She stated quite simply, I was in the French resistance during the German occupation. I looked at her as she uttered these words, and I could not comprehend what I was hearing. Claire? Jen?
I see. Yeah.
You were in the French underground, I exclaimed. Yes, she smiled, becoming slightly embarrassed at the fuss I was making.
Hi, Claire. Come on and have a seat.
Hello, Claire, come on in.
Have a seat.
We reserved a chair for you.
Always for me? Do I get a choice?
Yes.
Yeah, would you like some water, Claire? Either chair is yours.
Either. Which works better for you? You back a little further up.
That's it there, yeah.
Okay.
How about a candy, Claire?
Sounds good. Thank
Okay, you want one?
Sweet to sweets. Sweets to sweets.
Oh, I like that. Sweets for the sweets.
Huh?
That's a great one there.
you. Yeah.
God, that guy's so chipper today. Chipper today. I said I understood that part of it, but was not clear to me her involvement in the French underground. She stated quite simply, I was in the French resistance during the German occupation. I looked at her as she uttered these words, and I could not comprehend what I was hearing. You were in the French underground? I exclaimed. Yes, she smiled slightly, embarrassed at the fuss I was making. You spent 4 years down there in a hole during the entire occupation. In that limestone quarry, the catacombs, the Germans never found that location?
Oh, they knew about it, yeah.
Okay. I stammered.
What were they going to do? Blow it up?
I,
Yeah.
I stammered, trying to reconcile in my mind what she had just said. She nodded her head, and I was further convinced that she was truly a special person I held her in awe and admiration. I wanted to pursue the whole course of the events more thoroughly, but I could see that she was becoming a little distressed at my questioning, and I dropped the entire subject. I then realized I was still carrying the package with me. She handed it, and I then realized I was still carrying the package with me and handed it to Renee. She looked at it questioningly, and I told her to open it. She lighted up like a little schoolgirl with her first present when she saw what it was. As I gazed at her happy face, I was made aware that there was not much materially given to this person in affection or as a loving gesture. She was so used to giving that she did not know how it felt to receive. I felt warm all over, and she looked at the stockings. I knew it was not the gift as such, but it was just the thought that made her glow with warmth and appreciation. She reached over and kissed me. I felt that we reached another plateau in our relationship. I suddenly felt that I did not want to linger here any longer. It was too depressing to be in this environment. I got up and exclaimed, "Are you hungry?" "I am." "Where can we get some dinner?" She stated that we're not too far from her home and she would fix something there. "Let's go somewhere I feel like celebrating," I suggested. Renee looked at me and asked, "What are we celebrating?" I blurted out, not even thinking before I said, "Our friendship." She took my arm and started back to the metro station. We were there at the Place des Fonts restaurant, and our metro destination was Place Saint-Michel's, a little way from Renee's home. After a short ride, we went through a familiar, illuminated blue sortie sign and headed out the place of St. Michel's. As we walked, Renee would look at me, smile, and once again say something in French. She knew it annoyed me slightly since I did not know what she said. It pleased me when she did it, and I think it was the reason she resorted to it occasionally. We reached a place called La Trappiste overlooking the Seine River. The maitre d' welcomed us and Renee greeted him in French. As we were escorted to our table, past black jacket waiters wearing white aprons and scurrying about. It was warm and cozy place with a large stone fireplace throwing a soft yellowish glow throughout the dining room, with featured dark timber wood, gleaming mirrors embedded in paneled walls. Renee ordered in French, and I watched her as she spoke. She was aware I was watching her and felt a little uneasy as I observed her. She had ordered a large steak platter along with a fresh garden salad and several baked potatoes. As we returned from tidying up, our salad had arrived along with a basket of bread fingers and a bottle of wine. How was the bread fingers? How was the bread fingers? The bread, how was the bread?
Bread was good. That was homemade.
And how was the steak?
Homemade, yeah.
So it was good. It was a good meal.
Yeah.
She had taken off her jacket and revealed a white silken blouse which showed the outline of her bra that was a sheer material. Besides her other outstanding attributes, she was a beautiful woman, and I was greatly attracted to her. At that moment, I made up my mind that before I left, I would ask her to marry me. Did you ever do that?
No.
Okay.
No.
As we ate, she talked about doing more sightseeing, and that we should take the long metro ride to the coast of Brittany. I replied that I was perfectly content to spend the rest of my time with her and not going from place to place. Hello, how you doing? With that, she said softly, do you really mean that? We're not just saying that, or you're not just saying that. I took her hand and said, I never met anything more in my life. I knew I said that in a positive statement that was expressing what I've known for some time. I was infatuated with Renee these past several days, only to reinforce my feelings towards her. My only regret, and it was a critical aspect, was that I was only a few days left in which to savor her sensitivity and humanness. We had finished our meal and she suggested we walk back to our house, which was not far from where we were. As we walked, she took my hand, laced it in her fingers into mine, and asked if I was cold. My hand felt cold to her touch. Without thinking of anything in particular, I replied, cold hands, warm heart. At the first, she did not quite understand the meaning of my statement or its significance. After I explained it a bit, she understood and held my hand tightly. We reached her house as she entered and she asked if I would make a fire in the fireplace in the parlor and she would make some tea. I looked for some newspaper for kindling to start the fire, but found none. I then noticed a bunch of dry twigs and small branches along the fireplace and placed them in a teepee fashion in the fireplace. I also found some long-stemmed matches on the mantel and used them to start the fire. By the time Renee had completed making the tea, the fire was roaring splendidly and giving off a warm glow throughout the room. She entered the room with a tray and sat down beside a bench in front of the fireplace. Renee had discarded her jacket, revealing once again she had also taken off her boots, displaying her sensuous nylon-clad feet. She sat next to me on the bench, moving her body until it was touching mine. Drink your tea while it's still hot, she explained, pursuing her lips over every cup and looking at the logs burning. It must have been very lonely for you here, I said, rubbing her knee with my hand. She seemed oblivious to my hand on her knee and began to tell me a little about her time in the monastery. She started out by saying, in an answer to my question, that as a novice she would be subject to the strictest discipline and silence at all times. She was not allowed to talk to anybody except the sisters in charge, and at times the Mother Superior. There were issues in a small black notepad in which they recorded every day's infractions of the rules that they had committed. At the end of the day, just before Vespers, they would go into a Mother Superior's chamber and review their transgressions. They were allowed to only so many infringements per day. 4 to begin with, then they must gradually decrease to 0 the first 6 months. I released my hand from her knee and took the position before her on the floor so I could watch her as she talked. She was a somber, but her eyes were aglow with love and tenderness as she continued. My greatest infractions were taken to the other novices, and it took me some time to overcome that. So the greatest infractions that she was talking to the other nuns. Was that correct?
Right.
The greatest infractions Renee had at the monastery, she was talking to the other nuns, which she wasn't allowed to do.
Yeah.
Okay. She smiled and recalled how difficult it was. She recounted how Mother's Superior would admonish her for it and give her extra work duties to perform to make up for her deficiencies. She did them willingly with no remorse. Finally, toward the end of her probationary period, she would enter Mother Superior's chamber and proudly present the black book with no deficiencies recorded. She got off the bench and took a position beside me on the floor.
I'm gonna,
Take care now, watch out for the cables.
yeah, I will.
Watch
do
out for the
Alright,
studio
be careful.
cables. Good night, Claire.
tonight.
Right,
If
right.
I can still get something someplace.
Okay. Thank you, Claire. Good night, Claire. She went on to say that she was allowed only one visit from her parents the first year, and that was at Easter time.
What time?
Easter time. You want some water?
No, dear, no.
And that was at Easter time. She also mentioned sorrowfully that was the last time she saw her parents alive. Why don't you try to push back a little? You're out of focus now. Just roll back a little bit. A little bit more. A little bit more. Okay, you're back in focus. Okay. She also mentioned sorrowfully that was the last time she saw her parents alive. During her second year, her days were filled with sunrise and sunset. A typical day would start at 5:30 hours with a short vigil before breakfast, which was at 6:05 hours, followed by the morning prayers or mass. Then from 9:30 to 11:40 hours were the work duties to perform until lunch at 12:10. After lunch, there was free time until 13:30 hours, at which time there was a short mass and devotion, and then one would return to work assignment until 16:30 hours. The last meal of the day was served at 17:10 hours, which followed by sermons and lectures, which lasted until 1900 hours. A mass of adoration was next, which lasted well over an hour, after which they lasted until 1900 hours. Well over an hour, which she was followed by the review by Mother Superior. Lights out at 21:15 hours. I stated rather bluntly that her schedule was far more demanding than that which we had in the Army. She only smiled, took my hand, and stated that most of her duties were cooking and doing some paint work about the buildings. She occasionally did some garden work in the springtime, which she enjoyed considerably, especially when she could see the end result of her labor in the flowering of the different varieties of plants and bulbs. I asked her if she accepted all the restrictions and rituals. She answered immediately and unequivocally. Yes, I also wanted to become a nun more than anything else in my life. She then rolled off my arm, and that was beneath her head onto her back. Looking up at the ceiling, she sighed and said, "It was only towards the completion of her Novitiate that I realized that God had forsaken me and did not want me in his holy body. I felt that I had been abandoned and that the privilege of my faith has been relinquished from me." She turned toward me and continued, "It was the death of my brothers that convinced me that I was not destined to lead a monastic life, and that was the harshest revelation bestowed on me. I felt devastated and completely alone. My faith was shattered, but worst off, my self-esteem and purpose in life had been torn from me. I looked her hand and said, we lay side by side on the floor, and I kissed her gently and held it to my lips. I wanted to say something, but to overcome the verbalize what I was feeling. After a while, I whispered gently to Renee, it's getting late, I have to go. She turned to me, yes, she murmured, barely audible. She then rolled up and kissed me. I put my arms around her. As we lay there, I had her close to me. She would say something. With one quick motion, she turned over, and a second later, she was standing over me, outstretched, and helped me up. You must go. It's late, she whispered. I got up, and she helped me with my jacket, kissing me on the neck as she put my collar down. As we walked to the door, I asked her where I was to meet her tomorrow. She paused for a moment and replied, here if you like. I said that would be fine, kissed her and bid her au revoir. The next morning at the hospital, there was another shipment out, which left our ward almost empty. I had been here almost 2 weeks, and I had not seen a doctor or evaluation session in the same length of time. I walked without a limp and felt no pain, nor that I didn't have any problems in my leg or arm. For all intents and purposes, I was fit for duty, and it would not be long before I would be preceded and stamped RTD, Return to Duty, by the hospital staff. In a way, I was relieved to be leaving here, but much dismayed at not seeing Renee again. I still had not written home or either to Jane and Ann. I recalled Jean's pleading in a letter for me to write a short note just to say I'm all right. I still felt bad in not writing, but it always resolved itself into the same conclusion, my indecisions. I felt it better that I did not write rather than probing the inevitable. The only certainty was that I was no nearer to a solution to my dilemma until I met Renee. And that was also at the best understanding her desire for a religious destiny. After a quick breakfast, I picked up a pass early and headed for the metro station. The lieutenant on duty at the orderly room reminded me of T5 Eckerd, with her sly and artful remarks. I attributed them to the fact that I was only taking advantage of the daily passes. The rest of the ward, what was left of them, had their fill. Paris and were content just to lie around here, the hospital, until they were ready to ship out. So most of the other soldiers in the ward didn't want to see Paris anymore. They just had enough of going there.
Yeah.
I reached Renee's home a little before 1200 hours and a bit colder day. I had worn my knit sweater under my field jacket and reminded myself to take it off when I left. Renee answered the door immediately, and she greeted me with a cheerful bonjour.
Bonjour.
I could see that she was dressed exquisitely and looked radiant and enticing. She led me to the parlor, which was pleasantly warm and roaring fire in the fireplace. I quickly took off my jacket and sweater, and Renee sat next to me. How do you like the stockings? She asked, crossing her legs and looking at me. I glanced down at her crossed legs and her sensuous high heels exiting them. They're beautiful, the legs, not the stockings, I remarked. She asked if I'd eaten, and I informed her that I had an early breakfast, but would be surely want something later. She smiled and sat there as she prepared something for later. She got up and walked over to the cabinet sitting at the corner of the room and opened up one of the several drawers. She came back what appeared to be a photo album and sat next to me. Her perfume and fragrance of her body and my inner cravings, and I wanted to touch her then. Opening the album, she commenced to describe the photos of the two open pages. They were of her at the time when she was in the resistance. She was wearing baggy pants, thrust into high boot tops, and around her slender waist a cartridge belt. She was holding what looked like an old .03 rifle. I asked her rather impulsively if she ever fired a rifle. She said, of course, many times. I retorted, did you hit anything? With that, she became grave and flipped the page. I was a picture of her in the catacombs in a very room where we were. It was a picture of her in the catacombs in the very room we were in yesterday. She was sitting at the table operating a field switchboard. She looked younger but still displayed the exuberance and her great beauty. I asked her how the other people treated her. She searched for the correct word, moving her crossed legs back and forth. She finally blurted, protective. I could understand she was only 20 and fresh out of the convent. It was amazing, I thought, what she had gone through and still maintained an idealistic attitude. She said that she was mostly in charge of the Jewish women and children had escaped capture by Germans, who rounded them up and sent them to labor camps, eventually to the gas chambers. It was horrible, she explained, as there were many Jewish people interned by the SS whom they could not help. She explained that France through the resistance would help only the French Jewish nationals, but would not come to the aid of a regular Jewish population. There was also the WWII French, who would aid in the capture of all Jews, especially in the southeastern part of France, notably around Nice and Cannes. At that time, the resistance would be a mortal combat, more with the WWIItes than the Germans in trying to save the Jews from capture. During that period, Renee maintained the house and did many German paintings from the upstairs studio. These interested me, and I always wondered how she obtained these people to do the paintings. She smiled as if it anticipated my thoughts, taking my hands and held it tightly. She began by saying that the Germans always treated her with the utmost civility and courtesy, and with the greatest respect and dignity. Somehow, she related that they had learned that she was a Novotite and she painted well. They would come up to her studio and ask in the most businesslike manner if she would paint their portraits. They usually paid in small gifts, such as stockings, canned goods, sausage, or anything else they could obtain in her home. Never once did they seek sexual favors, nor did they condone it at any time. She averred looking at me. Of course, they did not know or suspect I was in a resistance, or they would probably have to be shot, she explained, fingering her hair and speaking with complete candor and honesty. I raised my hands to her lips and kissed her gently as she continued. The paintings you see are all those who were not picked up for the one reason or the other. She was transferred, some were transferred, others were killed, and some did not return for whatever reason, she stated. So all those paintings there of the Germans that were in her house were Germans that just never came back for one reason or the other.
Is that right?
Paintings, yeah. The Germans that Renee painted were in her house, but the Germans never came back.